Because as educators, like that's what we do, right? Is meeting the needs of students and of individual learners. But when you don't know what those are, it's just kind of like trying to hit a target that you can't really see.
Welcome to the Relational Parenting Podcast. I'm Jennifer Hayes, a parent coach and 20-year childcare veteran. Each week, I sit down with my own father, Rick Hayes, and discuss the complicated issues that parents face today, as well as some of the oldest questions in the book. From the latest research and the framework of my relational parenting method, we offer thought-provoking solutions to your deepest parenting struggles. Added bonuses include intergenerational wounding discussions and guest childcare experts. We will also start taking your parenting questions in episode 5, so be sure to comment with your biggest questions or email me directly at jenny@jennyb.co. Let's get started. Caroline LaPierre is a psychologist who has extensive experience working in the field of education and psychology. She works with families and individuals who want to grow to their next level. When families aren't satisfied with the answers they get from schools, Caroline helps them determine next steps that will lead to happy and positive changes. Caroline also believes change can be easy. Using clinical hypnotherapy to help calm and soothe the nervous system helps adult clients get unstuck and achieve goals. She leads online ADHD groups for women and members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Online courses are coming soon, and you can find all her services and information at www.yycpsych.com. All right, so this is episode 2 of our education series, and let's see, 2 of 5, and we are here with Caroline LaPierre, and she is a registered psychologist. And she works with children and families inside the education system. She owns a psychology practice that is private, and families come to her to ask for diagnoses and help advocating for their kids' needs in the education system. And so she is coming to us from Canada, and she's here to talk about and give you guys tips for helping your kids through the education system, because we all know that can be it's a team effort. And if any part of that team is pushing back and not listening to you as parents, that can be extremely difficult. So
yeah, that's a bad scene.
Yeah. So welcome, Caroline. Why don't you?
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Let's see. How did you get started working with kids?
Yeah. So I have been working with kids pretty much since I was 18 years old, going through my first degree, and got a job basically as a teaching assistant. Actually, where I live, it was the second language teaching assistant position, so working with French and English. And then I did that kind of throughout my university, and got a couple different degrees, started a couple different degrees, stopped those, and then decided to pursue education. And then I worked as a teacher for 6 years. I taught middle school, grades 5 to 9, pretty much every subject under the sun. And then, that is where it really started jumping out to me, like the different struggles of just families and students trying to kind of navigate life, trying to navigate school, and the different struggles that come up, right? And when you're teaching middle school, like classes are so big. I had like usually 180 kids walking through my door every day. So which is bananas, right? And when you're trying to like help these students and figure out what's the best for them, it just like time is so limited that becomes really difficult. So I knew that I didn't want to be a teacher like going forward. And then that just kind of transitioned naturally to what I do now, which is educational psychology. And then that just allows me to work one-on-one with kids and with families to support them so that hopefully they can go forward and then get that support from the teachers that they need.
Awesome. So grades 5 through 9, that's a hard group.
Yeah, I was on
God.
school board, for a while. Middle school, nobody's got anything on teaching middle schoolers.
those were even my least favorite years as a kid.
Oh,
I was
yeah.
like, ugh.
They
Anyway,
need help.
what were
Hormones going
some
crazy and
yeah, so 180 kids. I came from a very tiny school system. I graduated with 54 kids in my class. So
Okay.
the thought of 180 students coming through one classroom in a day is insane to me. How did you juggle 180 different unique needs and learning styles and like all of the things that are happening at that time of life?
Well, and that's the tricky part is with some students, it's really obvious. And some students are really good at advocating for their needs and saying, like, hey, this is what I need. This is what I'm used to. This is what's provided to me, usually because of the paperwork and all of that. But then a lot of students, really struggle with advocating for themselves, which is something that a lot of adults struggle with, right? Advocating
Yeah.
for themselves. And so when they don't, as a teacher, it's hard to have that time to go like digging through files and things like that. So that's where it becomes really tricky. And then I think that's where the parent part of it becomes so critical, is supporting your child through their learning and through the school system, is that it kind of falls on the parents to then be that squeaky wheel for their child to help
Mhm.
bring that to the teacher's attention.
sounds like that's a skill that would be really valuable to teach our kids when we're thinking about raising kids and parenting them, making sure they know how to go into a situation from as young an age as possible and say, hey, that's you're going too fast. Can you repeat that? Or, to advocate for themselves and get what they need. That sounds super valuable.
100%. And like, there's this example that's often given, like when children have, say, a nut allergy, for example, they will, like, from the age of 5, be like, hey, I'm allergic to nuts. Don't bring those around me. I can't be with them.
Mhm.
Like, don't feed that to me. Right. But when it
Yeah.
comes to things like learning and attention, ADHD, it's just totally like whether it be stigma or labels or what have
Mhm.
you, it's totally different, right? Kids aren't comfortable being like, hey, I struggle with reading. Here's what needs to happen for me.
Yeah.
And it's like it's
Huh.
kind of that
Yeah.
mind shift, right?
Well, and giving kids that language because it's very like when it's life or death, like something like a peanut allergy can be life or death. The parent starting when they're like 3 years old or whenever they get them allergy tested, like I know 3-year-olds who've been like, no peanuts, no peanuts, and
Exactly.
like
There
Yeah.
you go.
the parents drill it into them, like, do
Yeah.
not eat peanuts. Like,
Yeah.
what if we started our 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds on these are your needs?
Yeah.
And this is how you talk about them. So, like, whether that's your 6-year-old, maybe the teacher notices like they're not picking up reading as quickly as the other kids. That's fine. Kids develop at different times, and so teaching your child then at 6 years old, you know, make sure you let your teacher know if they're going too fast or if this is happening,
Yeah.
and make it normal instead of not talking about it and like trying to not make your kid feel bad or give them like some kind of stigma about themselves. Like if you do it in the right way and you normalize it for them instead of feeling bad about it, they'll be able to stand up and just ask for their needs to be met.
Yeah. Yeah. That
Exactly.
sounds so valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. That's right. Because as educators, like that's what we do, right? Is meeting the needs of students and of individual learners. But when you don't know what those are, it's just kind of like trying to hit a target that you can't really see.
Well, and some of it's
Yeah.
time consuming. It's not, there's things you can't fix. You have to cope with because your primary job is, hey, I have to teach something
Hmm.
to 180 kids. I can't spend all day on one kid.
Yeah.
And so there's just needs that teachers can't meet and just need to know how to work with best.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
For sure. Yeah. So if parents go in and say, hey, this is what the learning needs are. This is what's been done in the past. This is what's really successful. how can I support you in supporting my child when they're in your care all day, right? Uh,
Yeah.
goes a long way. Like of course with the school system it's a lot more complex than that, but in a nutshell that is like the best jumping off point, I think.
So tell me more, Caroline, about how you help families now outside of the school system. How do you help families navigate the education system with their kids?
Hmm. Yeah. So when families come to me, it can be kind of one and two things. So as an educational psychologist, I do psychoeducational assessments, and I do provide diagnoses and then accommodations and recommendations, steps to take going forward. So that does provide then the official paperwork that families can go back to the school with, and that's what allows the school to put like an IEP, an individualized educational plan
Hmm.
in place, get funding and things like that. So that is one way, and that's kind of the official way, right? If you will, to get the paperwork in place, like I said. But then the other way is sometimes parents are hesitant to go through the psychoeducational process.
Mm,
Some don't want labels. Some,
mm,
just want to like kind of try things on their own before kind of going that route. So then we just go through strategies, recommendations, things to think about, things to try. We look at different resources together, and then get them started that way.
So when you say they want to try something else, they want to try something besides diagnoses and IEP in the school, and they just want to try um, things at home, strategies, tools, like setting up an environment for their kids.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So, some parents will say, we'll try tutoring at home, whether that be parents or another tutor, like you just said, Jenny, right? Like setting up the environment for success, um, building habits. Sometimes small habits, sometimes changing big habits, and then seeing what kind of gains can be made from that, and how they can, as a family, try to apply that to the school setting without actually involving the school.
hmm.
Interesting. How often does that work? Do you like
Um, I mean, I think both can be successful, right?
Okay.
It really like it does require work, it does require time, it does require effort. I think the benefit to having the school is that then it can be consistent between home
Yeah.
and school, and parents and teachers can talk,
Yeah.
be on the same page, use the same strategies.
And hopefully the parent has the right comprehension of the situation, right? They're doing it on your own and not being a professional at it as opposed to involving a professional at it.
Hmm.
To get a professional, you kind of have to get a label, and you end up maybe with paperwork. How much where am I going? How much opportunity is there to involve the school without getting the label?
Well, without the paperwork, without the label, then we're really at the mercy of the school and their kind of willingness to help out.
Hmm.
But they aren't actually tied legally to doing anything. So that's
Okay.
where it can be tricky. So sometimes if, I know, Jenny, like you said at the start, if it's a smaller school, sometimes they may just have more time to provide that help. Um,
Mm.
so it can, yeah, it just depends on a few different things that are
Just
really
depends.
outside of anybody's control.
So we're really kind of talking about a formal versus informal
Yeah,
process in a way. Let's
exactly.
let's let's just handle this informally. It's not that bad. Or okay.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What are some of the
Hmm.
reasons that parents have for wanting to do things informally? So, not wanting to pursue either not pursuing official diagnoses or not sharing official
Mhm.
diagnoses with the school system. What do you hear? What are some of the
Hmm.
top reasons that parents go that route?
Well, the main one is labels. So not wanting labels, not wanting, the outcome of the assessment. assessment to impact how their child is seen from their teachers, or to then have the school make
Hmm.
like judgments based on said level for their kid. So that probably is the main one. But the other one that I had come up recently is that when you do have a formal diagnosis, um, it can then impact potential future employment. Um,
Really?
rarely,
It
and I don't
follows you, huh?
and really, the only time that that would come into play is like this one client that I've been working with recently. And he's like an older boy, 16, 17, about to wrap up high school and sort of go into life. And he's looking at maybe applying at like military or police. And so those kinds of professions. Where having some, it really depends. Sometimes if you have a diagnosis, that's okay. But if you have a diagnosis but we're taking medications or had strategies in place, then you maybe would not be able to apply for these positions.
Okay. You
So
have to disclose that. Okay.
but usually it does come down to the labels.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I'd never really heard a good description of how that worked before. I get that.
Hmm.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough choice as a parent, to
Yeah.
not. I don't want to label my kid, but you may not be. Now you're picking and choosing. Now you're playing doctor.
Mm,
Am I getting my kid the best care or
hmm.
not? That's one of those things that keeps you up at night.
For sure. And I think something that I come back to time and time again when working with clients is whether or not there's a diagnosis, oftentimes the way forward is the same. So, for example, if we're looking at something like dyslexia, right, formerly called specific learning disorder in reading, the way forward is the same. And that's, looking at the strategies and implementing those in the practice. And you do that through like a learning specialist, probably, or
Hmm.
a tutor. Some parents try to do it on their own. Um, but whether or not there's a diagnosis, that's probably how you would go forward. So, depending on how much you want the school involved, right? But those are things that you can do on your own for sure. If
So
you,
that makes it make sense to not to avoid the diagnosis if the path forward's the same. Why burden anybody with a diagnosis? Let's just do it informally. Okay. Yeah. So
Mhm.
both choices are good and healthy in the right circumstance.
Yeah. Yeah. The advantage, I think, to doing the full psychoeducational assessment is that that does include a cognitive assessment. So then coming out the other side, you do really specifically know and have a really in depth understanding of how your child's brain works, or if you go through it as an adult, which a lot of adults do, how your own brain works. And then, like really specifics about, like, yes, this person's a visual learner, this person's, more of a verbal learner, and how to approach that. So that would be one of the like main positives of going through the assessment is then it kind of becomes easier to target those teaching and learning strategies because like, okay, for this person the visual is going to really be the most helpful. That's what naturally makes the most sense to the brain, so then you go hard with that.
Yeah. I think that even though the path forward is the same regardless, because we're basically looking at a child and just saying these are their needs and this is how their needs are going to get met. I think
Mm-hmm.
the only struggle in that for me would be that is the lack of consistency then at school. So are they going to school not absorbing any or as much information, or feeling lost or feeling dumb, like, labeling
Yeah.
themselves those things because they're not
Yeah.
keeping up and they're watching other kids in the classroom do things that they're not doing.
Yeah.
And then they go home and they have a private tutor who reteaches them all of those things that they just sat
Mm-hmm.
through in class. And yeah, I don't know. I'm just talking this out loud with you. I'm kind of thinking through it out loud, and it feels like almost like double the work for the child if they're not
Mm-hmm.
getting those integrated services that they need to learn the way they need to learn at school. or getting to take breaks during tests for things like
Yeah.
ADHD specifically, or having
Yeah,
someone
exactly.
help them read the questions on the test for someone with
Mhm.
dyslexia, or
Mhm.
these small adjustments that we can make for kids. But then I can also see the other side of, like, if a kid in the classroom is having the teacher or an assistant teacher have to sit with them and help them read through the questions, then the other kids, are they going to get made fun of at recess? Are they,
Yeah.
are the labels going to turn into something that they get bullied for? Yeah, I don't know.
What causes the least, like any decision, it's what causes the least harm, at the mercy of circumstances. I very much get the consistency thing
Mhm.
at home and at school. How do you make so that's kind of the goal. The baseline goal is to have consistency between home and school.
Yeah.
How do you achieve that?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. And like Jenny just said, right? We want to cut down on time. Like when you're spending like 6 or 7 hours of your day already at school, and then you
Mhm.
have to go home and do more school. Like,
Yeah,
how disheartening is that? Especially when you have somebody who's struggling and they have to spend so much more time and energy just trying to make it through the day than their peers. And then we're asking them to go home and do probably more of stuff that they already don't like. And it's like,
yeah,
Mhm.
this is
yeah,
supposed to be your fun
yeah.
time. Now go do more of this stuff that you hate.
Yeah.
Um, so I think, like, obviously, I support psychoeducational assessments. That's what I do. And getting everybody, like, it takes a village, right? So getting all of our village on the same page, putting everything in place, um, like you guys just said, helps cut down on that time and helps make the time there more meaningful.
Yeah. That's yeah,
Very
because as
interesting.
someone, so I went through my whole childhood never being diagnosed, because it wasn't until fairly recently that there were types of ADHD assigned.
Mm, yes.
And so when I was a kid, everything was everything that was being tested for was hyperactivity. So, and it was
Yeah.
usually boys.
Yes.
And so boys who were hyperactive got their ADHD diagnosis, and very rarely did girls ever get theirs because ours was inattentive.
Hmm.
um, and
Hmm.
I remember having anxiety, and I remember struggling in school. And I remember, I was a B and C student uh, until high school. And then I was an A plus student because strictly out of the fear of God that was put into me of not getting into the private university I wanted to go to.
Motivation.
But I remember after those 4 years of like scraping by
Mm.
to get my
Yeah.
A's. And then I went to college, and what I did in high school was I studied that, like, I just like for 3 or 4 hours the night before, I would just memorize, 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 memorize. And then I wouldn't do or think about anything else until I got up, went to school. I wouldn't talk to anybody until I got to that test and info dumped. And then it was over.
Mm.
And that was like,
Yeah.
that was the constant wheel that I was on. And,
Hmm.
and then I went to college and had no study skills. I had no time management skills, had no just basic life skills to manage any kind of course load,
Mhm.
let alone a college level reading load, studying load, right? Because it's way more than high school. And
Mhm.
so the crash studying before a test didn't work anymore. So my grades were
Mm.
awful. And I went, I think I was 19, and just like everybody just like everybody else in college, I wanted Adderall. I wanted to be able to study. I wanted to be able to focus. And when it came time for finals, I needed help, and I didn't know what else to do. And I knew people were taking Adderall. So I went to, I don't remember if it was the campus doctor or whoever. And I, answered the questions the way that I was supposed to,
Mm.
and was diagnosed with ADHD and given Adderall. And I was like, cool, great, I did it. Um, not taking the ADHD diagnosis seriously and not realizing that most of the questions I was actually just being honest about. I wasn't even lying. Like it's just actually the right answers also
Right.
happened to be true. Um,
Yeah.
but then I don't know, throughout my 20s, I kind of had inklings of like, maybe I really do have ADHD. But it really wasn't until a couple years ago. Um, my husband brought an article to my attention about ADHD, and I think his brother had sent it to him or something. So it was just very random. And I read it and I was like, oh, that I do all of those things.
That's me. That's
I
me.
suck
That's
at all
me.
of
Yeah.
those things, like more than my peers, more than other people that are in my
Mhm.
life. And I've
Mhm.
just kept it inside. And I've always had like anxiety. I would get anxiety at school, and like I would have like there's all these different ways that it manifests.
Mhm.
And all these
Mhm.
diagnoses that I had received throughout my life with anxiety and depression and all of those things, I just started like reading and processing that a couple years ago, and finally went to a psychiatrist who was like, "Yeah, you have ADHD,"
Mm.
and so I
Thanks, Doc.
just so this whole story. I'm telling it because I personally feel like there could have been a lot less suffering, and I could have felt understood throughout my childhood and been
Mm.
more capable of saying, "Hey, I'm struggling with this,"
Yep.
to either my parents or my teachers, or
Yeah.
like I needed help with like I did not know how to make myself study without an impending immediate deadline.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
because and I even talk now
Firefighter.
to my husband, and now that I'm an entrepreneur and I'm trying to run a business, and there's no one holding me accountable for that. Like it is,
Yeah.
being an entrepreneur is already hard for anyone.
Mhm.
With ADHD, I am it's literally like trying to flex a muscle you don't have to make yourself do something that is mentally painful. It's not just like I don't feel like doing it. Like I want to do it. I want to do it. It's stuff I want to do. It's stuff I care about and I want to do it.
Mhm.
And it is still so difficult without the exact right circumstances and environment and visual
Mm.
cues and all of the things. And for women, also, our cycles can affect different parts of the month. And like it is a constant battle
Mhm.
and a constant trial and error of coping mechanisms to overcome and trick my brain into doing
Mhm.
stuff that people without ADHD can just sit down and kind of white knuckle themselves through it, like little
Yeah.
menial tasks like administrative stuff, and so anyway, I just naturally had to figure these things out in adulthood
Mm.
long after school was over. And I wish that we had had more information on how ADHD manifests in girls, and someone had seen it
Yeah.
and had seen anxiety in my little 8-year-old body instead of an 8-year-old who just doesn't feel like going to school, and gone, something's going on at school. What
Mhm.
is it?
Mhm. Mhm.
And like digging deeper and figuring that out, and getting me a diagnosis so that there were things in place to help me get my education, and take
Despite
brain breaks and
Yes.
all those
despite the
things.
label, the ADHD label's pretty common now.
Mhm. Mhm.
Maybe the stigma or whatever, all the things attached to that, balanced against the struggle into your 30s to identify what's going on. And
Mhm.
then the struggle, what you're describing about the day to day, I call friction. It just it's swimming through molasses. It's just
Yeah.
Mm.
harder,
Yeah.
takes more work
Yeah.
to do things that other people do, sometimes easier. And having a leg up on that would be a tremendous benefit for the child in some
Mhm.
circumstances. Yeah.
Mhm. For sure, for sure. And like Jenny was saying, right, as a woman, as a young girl, it also adds like this whole new dimension, right? Like oftentimes I hear from parents, well, she can't have ADHD because like she can focus and study for long periods of time, or
Yeah.
she does get really good grades and she's not in class stirring up trouble. So then the teacher is like, no, she'll just be fine, right? She's just working through this and then she'll be fine. Like I hear
Mm-hmm.
it all the time and parents hear it all the time. Um,
Mm,
and like you said, Jenny, the inattentive type, right, is really so internal
Mm-hmm.
that nobody knows other than the person who's living it, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I think it can become really tricky for parents and for teachers especially, right? Because then when you are faced with that inattentive piece and nobody's seeing it, but the
Mm-hmm.
person's experiencing it on the inside, but then you have the people who are like really outwardly
Yeah.
hyperactive that take a lot of time and attention, um, it becomes really tricky.
Yeah.
so what's a good tip for a parent to make sure their kid is make sure someone is digging down into that? If there's, when you see somebody present, how do you ensure as a parent, how do you ensure that the diagnosis for your kid is good and not just a function of busy school people, or the teacher hasn't seen that before, or because there's
Mm.
teachers who have been around forever, there's teachers who have been there, this is their first year. And so as a parent, how do you shepherd your kid through the system like that for that purpose?
Hmm. Well, I think as a parent, nobody knows your kid better than you.
Mm-hmm.
And as a parent, I think you just have kind of that internal sense of like, something's up.
Yeah.
Something's,
Something's going on.
yeah,
Yeah.
something's going on. And then, and then sometimes people like discount what you're saying, right?
Sure.
All the
Like
time.
I said
Dismiss.
before, she'll be fine. He'll be
Yep.
fine. They're just working it out, whatever. But if deep down you think, no, something needs to be checked out, not letting other people kind of discount your feelings and then seeking out a professional or looking at resources online and doing a little bit of your own research if need be, and then finding a professional who will take you seriously. Because there are, of course, professionals who also don't believe in things like ADHD or who brush parents off and things like that. So
Sure.
if as a parent you really think that it's warranted to look into something and that's what you feel on the inside, nobody knows your kid better than you. So take those kind of heart promptings seriously and seek out professionals.
Yeah, that's definitely a listen to your gut and
Yeah.
learn to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Some things nobody else is going to notice the subtle stuff the way a parent does.
Mm-hmm.
And
Exactly.
so make somebody explain it to you to the point where you're happy that the right thing is being done.
Hmm.
Don't take a pat on the head as a final word. Keep pushing.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
are
Yeah.
some of the ways? Because so for me, it was, and I remember in third grade, I would have a stomach ache every day, and I would
Mm,
either
me
tell
too.
my parents or tell my teacher, and it basically like I did it every single day, so it became like the boy who cried wolf, and I was just
Mm,
brushed off, right?
Do you
yeah.
have a
Or it
fever?
was,
Go to work. Go to school.
yeah, no fever, go to school,
Hmm.
um, or it was. Uh, well, I don't even remember much past that. But so my question is to you, especially for, we have so much more information now, right, about the different types
Hmm.
of ADHD. What are some of the ways that an inattentive type shows up? So, what are some of the manifestations that show up instead of clear ADHD symptoms? How
Mhm.
does that show up in kids who can't quite tell you what's going on?
Mhm. Well, it can be so, I mean, like we've been saying, it's one of those things that's a little bit trickier, right? Because it is so internal. But some of the things are, of course, like the daydreaming, right? Tuning in and out of conversation. So this is where parents are like, "Were you even listening to me right now? Like, what did I just say?" Right?
Mm,
Yeah.
Um, or things where you give your child like a to-do list, like, "Hey, go brush your teeth, put your socks on, like get your homework and let's go." And then you find them like in their room playing with Lego and you're like, "Did you not hear what I said?" And they're like, "Oh, like I knew I came up here for a reason. Yeah, right. I was supposed
shiny,
to brush
shiny
my
new
teeth."
thing walk across my path.
Yeah.
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 Well, and at
So
what age would you expect them to be able to do a multi-step list of actions like that? Because to a certain age, to a certain point, if you send a 5-year-old to their room with a 6-step list of things to get, like they're
yeah.
gonna go play with their Legos.
It's pretty dependable.
For
They're
sure.
not getting to 6. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, for like early elementary, let's say like typical morning routine or bedtime routine stuff, right? Like
Hmm.
brush your teeth, get dressed,
Yeah,
then come back and give new instructions, right? Okay, so
yeah,
now that we've done those things, these are the things I need you to do now, right? Um, but for most people, the more we try to keep in our minds, the more we can kind of forget stuff, right? So of
yeah,
course, with little kids, um, or younger kids is where sometimes we can bring in support. So this is something like having a whiteboard, let's say, of like tasks to do. And then they can like check off when they've done it, or they have something concrete to kind of check back to. And if you have a kid that's not a reader or not a strong reader or not yet a reader, then you can, instead of writing words like brush your teeth, you can put like a little picture of a toothbrush, right? And then a picture
mm,
of clothing or something like that, to kind of just cue them along.
yeah.
I know something I discovered at work years ago was it was a book called Getting Things Done, I think.
Mm,
And the
I have
method
that book.
is just, yeah, don't try to keep, because that's what I would do. I used to be real interrupt driven. I was great at starting out the day with a plan, and then there'd be 15 interruptions, and I was very proud of myself for being able to work my way back out of the unplanned stuff and get
mhm,
back and still accomplish things. But that's a
mhm.
lot of work.
For
Like we're
sure.
talking
Hmm.
about, and so it's, the getting things done thing is everything goes on a piece of paper,
Yep.
all
Mhm,
the pieces of paper go in a tray, and then you can go home and forget about it, because when you come back into work or back home, yeah, just look at the top thing on the tray, and there you
mhm.
go. But there's a little friction there to get things written down, or in my case, I keep a list of outstanding issues all the time. It's just like,
Mhm.
okay, here's my list, make lists, and if you don't see me write it down, it didn't happen. If I need to, I carry a book, or a book, now it's OneNote, and
Yep.
it's like, if I don't make a note of it, if I don't put it in the calendar, just don't count on it.
Yep.
I caution people about that. If it's important, but you get, so there's coping mechanisms for it.
Mhm,
I found that in my 40s, I think. I
mhm.
was 40 before I figured that out. If someone had taught me that in third grade, that would have been a good thing.
For sure. Yeah, for sure. And that's one of those life skills that I think we sometimes think people are just kind of born with, is like how to manage a timetable or how to
Hmm.
like use your day
Hmm.
planner. But it is something that is a learned skill and that is a useful skill. And some people, I guess, still like paper pencil. Um, and some people like the technology part. I like both. Because I hate on my phone where I can only see like one day at a time, or if I look at the
Yep.
calendar, I could see the dots, but I'm like, well, that doesn't mean anything. So I like having like the Costco size like wall
Hmm.
calendar
Yep.
where I'm like, oh yeah, okay, so on
Yep.
Thursday, this is what I need to do. Whereas if I look on my phone, I'm like, well, I don't know, I'm only looking at Monday. Like, who cares about Thursday?
Yeah.
So using these types of things to like help your child learn how to organize themselves, right? And
Yeah.
things like that. But yeah, but even like you're just saying, Papa Rick, a lot of like the top CEOs, they always like carry around notebooks and have talked about this openly. Carrying around notebooks, don't try to keep anything in your head, write everything down, and then there it is, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Then if you you go in the hospital for a week or something, when you come back, it's all right there.
It's all there. Mm-hmm.
Day timers. I'm actually thinking about going back to day timers. I'm in IT and I hate to carry a day timer. I want to be cool and electric and electronic, but I really prefer the day timer. I can fold out the month or the quarter,
Yeah.
or you can make your own little charts.
Yeah.
I can't wait for a phone that does that. I need something that changes size to really be happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then
Go ahead.
okay. um, another tool that I like for parents is, like a lot of parents like the sticker chart, right? That's something that teachers use,
Hmm.
that's used in schools, right? But as humans, as individuals, we do really well with, I mean, like you said at the beginning, Jenny, like, right, tight, short deadlines. But then we
Mhm.
also do well when we have treats right away or things right away. So a lot of
Mhm.
Hmm.
times when we have like a sticker chart and then the kid is looking at it and is like, "Oh no, I need like 25 stickers to get like whatever this dinosaur thing or whatever it is," right?
Hmm.
We need like we need things to keep us motivated that are a lot shorter
Mhm.
than that. So what I like to do is, again, with like a big like normal wall size calendar, and then I put like little post-its on the day, and then on the day I'm like, "Oh, I've done this." So I get to rip it off. And then as I'm ripping off post-its, it's
Mm.
like immediately satisfying.
Yeah.
And then
Hmm.
like a little treat, whatever that is. And a little treat might be like 2 Skittles, it might be like 5 minutes of Roblox time or whatever it is. Like, as parents, you know what the best hook is for your child, but something to kind of keep them motivated while they work towards like the big goal
Yeah.
and building healthy habits in the meantime.
Milestones in project planning.
Yeah.
There's chunks. You break things up into chunks. Sure.
Yeah.
So I struggle with something that I've really that's like really at the forefront of my like struggle list right now is that I will do brain dumps where I'm like,
Mm.
I need to do this and that and this, and I just like scribble as fast as I can.
Yep.
And then that list is so long that I get overwhelmed by it and I don't ever look at it again.
Mm.
And so it's actually like more taxing for me because I don't forget things. It all lives in here
Mm.
for me. It lives in my brain. It's just like the little things that I need to do. Things like appointments and phone call. Like my calendar on my phone is color coordinated and every second of the day is planned out and none of
Mhm.
it ever happens when it's supposed to. But anyway,
She's really good at calendars. She made me
when
a calendar once.
yeah, well, I'm really bad at sticking to them though. And because I look at them and I get overwhelmed, and I do the same thing with my lists. Like
Yeah.
if you
Yeah.
were in my office, like I've got like 2 wall calendars that are 3 by 2 feet, and one is a year and one is a month, and I've got sticky
Mhm.
notes all over my desk, and I've got like 6
Mm.
different notebooks all around the house, each with its own pen hooked on the front,
Mhm.
so that no matter where I'm at in the house, if I have a thought and I need to write it
Mhm.
down, I have a space to do that. But I've found that like
There you
Mhm.
go.
if I get up for my day and there's like the stuff that has to get done that day and then there's the stuff that I like want to get done that day. If I write it all
Mhm.
down, I get overwhelmed and I will scroll TikTok instead or I'll
Yeah.
clean the freaking house. Like I
Yep.
will find
To
Mhm.
some
escape.
way to escape it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like
Have you seen the 7 Habits of Highly, I keep quoting books. Can we do that without a royalty or anything?
You've given
I
me all
always
these books you're mentioning. I have all of them.
have I? Okay, that's probably why. Because I find one. What year did I give it to you?
I think I was early
The four
20s.
quadrants helped me a lot with that.
Mm.
It's like,
Yeah.
okay, here's the important and urgent stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is optional, and it helps me look at my list of things to do and go, well, only 25 of those are things I really need to worry about. The other 75, nobody's going to die if I don't get those done until next year. So,
Well, but sitting down
helps me.
And writing out that graph and categorizing everything, deciding which box each thing goes into is yet another task on my list.
Yes, it's friction, it's overhead, yeah.
So it's like, yeah. And I mean, so Caroline, I would love to hear your insight on that if you have any. You're not here to treat us, but
that's right. Hey, I've got a mole here talking.
Yeah.
But do you ever run into that with kids, like where it's like all these coping skills and some of them work for some people and some of them actually makes things harder?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And I think, like you guys just said, pick the top 2 or 3 and then go with that, right? Because definitely if you start like brain dumping and then you end up with this huge list of stuff, like that will be overwhelming. That would be overwhelming for anybody, right? So pick like, what do I absolutely need to do today? Awesome. And then move on.
Yeah.
You have to manage your expectations, just because you thought of it and wrote it down.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make it an emergency.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's funny that we've run into this on other episodes where to pass a skill on to your kids, it's good for you to pick it up too. The reason I get into this so
modeling.
much because we're getting hooked up and hung up in oh yeah about our past with ADHD, and golly, what if our parents had known this? What if I'd have known this 10 years sooner when I was raising you? What that's something to keep in mind. Is a little personal development while you're developing your little one too is good.
100%. And I think that's so key. And I often hear parents say, like, when it comes to like ADHD coaching or even anxiety and things like that, parents will say, I noticed their stuff got better when my stuff got better.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
that's a concept
everybody gets
that I coach all parents on is no matter what child you have, like your kids are going to copy you. They're going to do what you do. And so if you are dysregulated or you handle conflict by yelling, if you are disorganized or you're constantly forgetting things. And I mean, some of these things are just like human nature, right? And it's going to happen. But any habits as a parent, like, do you get up in the morning and I don't know, like for me, I lay in bed for a while to wake up. But I want my kids to be able to like get up and start their day without laying in bed for an hour and a half. And so like getting up, getting going, washing my face and, journaling, meditating, doing some yoga, I often think about like the morning routine I want to have with my children to set a good example. And versus the one that I have on a lot of days now and, different things. But anyway, what I tell parents is that the most powerful tool at your disposal is your own habits. What does your life look like? Like instead of raising kids and being like, well, I want to give my kids everything I didn't have. Well, then you need to be the parent you didn't have. Like you need to be the parent you needed. And whether that requires you to read some books or to have a therapist or to hire a coach or take some classes. Like I've actually heard a lot of parents who took their kid in to get diagnosed and ended up with their own diagnosis because they learned and they were like, oh,
all the
Maybe I
time,
need to
right?
get tested.
All the time. I hear it. Like parents will come in and then as we're going through like assessment results and I talk about like steps to take going forward and all of that, that is the point where a lot of times parents will be like, I need to come in for an assessment with you because
Yeah.
you could have written this report about me,
Yeah.
like all the time. And that's something that I've heard people say recently is like heal from your own stuff so that your
Yeah.
kids don't need to heal from you.
Yeah.
Which is like,
Yes.
oh, as a parent,
Yeah.
like, yes,
Tingles. Ugh.
yes.
Generational trauma and yeah, sure.
So yeah, and we all like could do our own work, right? But definitely as a parent, having that awareness of like, oh yeah, like, if I'm setting up these bad habits, what is that teaching these little people going forward, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially unconsciously. Kids do what we do, not what we say. Even
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
know better, you
Exactly.
need to work on your own habits.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So Caroline, when you and I were talking on the phone, preparing for the podcast,
Hmm.
we talked about some of the values or beliefs or even researched backed methods that we share,
Hmm.
and um, a lot of it overlaps with relational parenting, which is what I'm
Hmm.
trying to teach parents.
Hmm.
And when it comes to a diagnosis, we've been focused a lot on ADHD, but we know there's a lot of other diagnoses out there
Hmm.
that are very common.
Hmm.
Autism, dyslexia, learning delays, developmental delays of all kinds. And I
Hmm.
think that it's important to spend a few minutes talking about how, even though these are a diagnosis, for me, I the more people I know, the more people I know with these diagnoses and on some spectrum
Mm,
of the diagnosis.
Hmm.
And for me,
Hmm.
it just reaffirms that humanity, there is no typical or normal. There's no such thing as normal. Everyone is on some kind of spectrum, and
Hmm.
everyone has different ways of learning things and different ways of doing things and different
Hmm.
ways that the neurons in their brains connect, and
Yeah.
and how there's more than one right way to do things. But our school system, to bring this back to education specifically, our school system is set up in a way that serves like one type of person,
Hmm.
and then
Hmm.
everybody else that's outside of that type of learner requires an IEP in order to
Hmm.
get their needs met.
Hmm.
yeah,
um,
bell curve.
and so this is something on our last episode we were talking to Sarah about, is that the education system was created to produce factory workers. The current education
Hmm.
system
Yeah.
was created to create factory workers in a time when there was a very high need for factory workers, but that is not the
Hmm.
world we live in anymore. And so we are
Hmm.
now, a lot of educators or people who work with the education system but outside of it are trying to help schools figure out how to transition their care model to a more child-centered, individualized way of
Hmm.
serving students. And I'm just
Hmm.
curious, like, what is your take on that? What is your insight on that? Like, what do you see happening in education as it evolves over the next 10 or 20 years?
Hmm.
Because we already have a teacher shortage.
Hmm.
Like, what does
For
this
sure.
look like?
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that anybody really has a clear answer to that or really like a
Right.
clear path forward, right?
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think that, in educational programs and teacher development and things like that, you learn a lot about multiple intelligences.
Mm,
And I think that kind of shapes teaching practices now. And I think it's not just about teaching practices at this point, but the important part is, assessment practices, right?
mm-hmm.
Of getting that knowledge out of the student and knowing that they have the information that they need. That doesn't have to be a multiple choice test, though, right? For example,
Yeah.
or a long written answer test. As long as you know that they know the curricular outcomes, that really is the key. And like you
Yeah.
were just saying, the educational system was built with a certain goal in mind. But when I'm working with students and parents and thinking about like all these different kinds of learners, I think a really good representation of it, and you may have seen this online, is like if we think about the test as climbing a tree, right?
Hmm.
If you're a monkey, climbing the tree is not going to be an issue. And that is
Right.
Yeah.
what the educational system is, right? But the fact is, we're not all monkeys, right? We have like
Hmm.
sharks and giraffes, wolves, and what have you, but the test is still climbing a tree. Well, none
Yeah.
of those other animals can climb the tree, so they'll fail. And then they'll go
Yeah.
forward thinking they're failures, but that's not it at all. They have different
Yeah.
skill sets, different talents, different ways of showing their knowledge.
Hmm.
So that's how
That's a
I
great
like to,
analogy.
yeah, right. Just kind of make sense. But I do think that is where differentiated education comes in to help meet the needs of our students. And we do have some programs, right, like Montessori, Waldorf, all those
Hmm.
programs. But again, that's really not mainstream. Those are usually very, very
Yeah.
small, very private schools,
And very
um,
expensive.
and very expensive. Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah. Have you
Yeah, that's what
seen?
it comes down to sometimes is,
Yeah.
there's a lot of things, teaching emotional intelligence in kids and helping with substance abuse. And, we know ways to deal with better and more effective ways to deal with things, but they're expensive to implement, in the
Hmm.
public schools. And
Yeah,
so parents are kind of left to their own.
yeah.
When there's a segment of public schools that where there's low socioeconomic students,
Yeah.
and their only resource is the public schools resources. And so they
Yeah.
don't have the option to hire a tutor. They don't have the option to get their
Yeah,
kid
Yeah.
yeah.
resources outside of what the school can provide. And so if you're in a low socioeconomic community, your school is not getting the tax dollars that another school might be getting. And so they might not have the programs and the staff and, all of those things available as well. And so then we're getting into inequality and, we're getting into a lot
Yeah,
of
Social
pieces
engineering
there.
and yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, and
which
then
is why
there's,
it's important for parents to be good advocates and
yeah.
be as knowledgeable as possible and understand their own stuff. And sure,
Well, it's also why we need the school systems to like there's a level of government responsibility
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
stepping into the school, the way the school systems are set up. And I don't know enough about how taxes get allocated, and I'm sure that there's the state tax, property tax goes towards your school systems, and that's regulated. Is that regulated by the state? Is that regulated by the federal government? Like,
very much.
and
Hmm.
who decides which schools get how much? And I know it's like by
Hmm.
area and all of that, but like, how do we even that playing field? Because you have kids growing up in a school system where it's a 5,000 person school and they have a freaking Olympic swimming pool
Hmm.
and a $10 trillion computer lab. And then you have kids growing up in a school out in rural Kansas, and there's 20 kids in the graduating class, and they
Hmm.
have like reading, writing, and arithmetic, and that's it, you know?
Yeah.
And so there's,
It's
you
kind
know,
of built into the system.
yeah.
I'll have to pass along to you the education I got on school finance on the school board someday, at least how, and it varies by state, but that's
Hmm.
exactly the case. Is some people are struggling to hire. They don't have as much money for teachers and administrators, so
Hmm.
they don't get the cream of the crop,
Yeah.
and then resources, and so that's it's if you're in that situation, it's even more important that you do everything you can to be the best parent you can, especially with dealing with a big system like the schools, which has a
Hmm.
lot of inertia with it. When you walk into it, they kind of have the ability to say, here's the thing. I liked what you said, Caroline, about assessment, not standards, assessment practices. So
Mm-hmm.
back to making sure, did they, I have a feeling about my kid and I am not getting an answer that seems helpful and
Mm-hmm.
helps with consistency between school and home, and keep digging, keep pushing, because
Yeah.
it can be a struggle, a real struggle.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Like, I mean, everything that, that we just mentioned, are things that really as parents, as citizens are kind of out of our control. Those are education's very top down, right? Comes from the government. So all you have as a parent is sometimes relying on yourself and your own resources, right? Whatever that means, educating yourself, and then being the best advocate for your kid that you can be.
When families come to you, are you ever then in touch with their schools, like their administration, helping? Like, do you then come to the school for an IEP meeting and you're there and you're part of that, or do you pass it off to like the school psychologist who takes that information and helps create the IEP? Like, how directly in contact with schools are you? Um, yeah.
Hmm. So because I work privately,
Hmm.
basically I'm not involved with the school at all or very little.
Okay.
Hmm.
And one of the things that people who come to me, families that come to me, sometimes because they don't want to share things with the school, like for everything we've been talking about from the beginning. So
Yeah.
sometimes they say like, don't contact the teacher at all. I
Yeah.
want to keep this between us. And then when I finish the report, I
Huh.
give it to parents, and then it becomes up to them to share it with the school.
Hmm.
Most do it right away. Some want to kind of sit on it, think about it, reflect, see what they can do on their own. On occasion, I will have parents who say, hey, like, I got this great information from you. I can't relay it to them. Like, this isn't the language I know. It isn't the world I know. And so sometimes I will go in if the school is willing to meet with me, and have a meeting, discuss findings, and, discuss with the school what's possible going forward. But as somebody who works privately, that doesn't happen a whole lot.
So you ever had to either really push a team in a school system to either take the family seriously or take the child's needs seriously, or have you ever had to really like had a really difficult case with a family where you had to really like help them fight back, or advocate? Like, how often does that have you seen that happen where a school pushes back or doesn't want to implement an IEP?
Hmm. So, for the most part, educators are educators because they love kids and they want to see them be successful. And for the most part, the
Mm,
feedback I get from teachers is tell me what to do. I want
yeah.
to help, but I don't know what to do. I will do just about anything to help
Exactly.
this kid
Yeah.
and this family.
Yeah.
Just want to put that out there. That is
Yeah.
usually the feedback
Yeah.
that I get, right?
Yeah.
Um, Very rarely, but a couple of times I have heard from schools, um, kind of like we talked about at the beginning, right? I don't know that this kid's really struggling that much. Um, those types of comments. Only a couple of times in the time that I've been doing this has that come up. And I think that may be due to those like budgetary constraints or
Mm,
reflection on their student population and things like that. Again, very, very rarely, like maybe twice has that ever happened. And it's unfortunate. And then, I mean, my feedback to parents at that point is, what are you getting out of this school? What you want? And is this school really the best fit for your family? Very
yeah.
rarely does that conversation happen. But sometimes as parents, you have to wonder, like, and I've, asked myself the same question for my kid, right? Is this school meeting our needs as a family? Is this school meeting my kid's needs as a learner?
Yeah. Well,
So that's a good point. I mean, ultimately you're in control as the
Yeah.
parent. There's generally something you can do next.
Yeah.
And
For
there's
sure.
so outside the public school system, the systems I'm aware of are obviously private schools, obviously cost money, hard to get into, etc. Um, charter schools, similar situations sometimes. Sometimes they're free.
Mhm.
Sometimes scholarships, yeah.
Homeschooling, some kind of homeschool cohort where there's like a
Mm.
neighborhood, several
Yep.
families in a neighborhood will come together, and they'll either trade off which house the kids
Mhm.
go to during the week,
Yeah.
and the parents will take turns, or they will hire someone, a teacher or an educator or a childcare professional, to teach the material and help the kids with that. And then there's online schooling. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And that there's free. So it's free online public school.
Yeah.
And I've seen kids who thrive with that.
Really?
And absolutely, they can sit down at their computer for 2 or 3 hours a day, get their homework assignment, get it done, and then they've got the rest of their day to just be a kid and
Mhm.
Knock
you
it
know,
out and get on
live
Yeah.
their
with it. Yeah.
life and help cook and pick
Yeah.
up more life skills that will serve them down the road versus
Yeah.
just like sitting in a classroom, for 6 or 7 hours and then coming home and doing homework or whatever. But there's different, like, I don't know that I would have benefited from online schooling. I think that I would have had to have someone sit there with me the whole time.
Yeah.
Especially
Um,
young, especially young. Later
yeah.
on, college, I can imagine doing college that way. I
Yeah.
don't know about before college,
Yeah.
where
Well,
it would
and
have kicked in.
I think like if the pandemic has taught us anything, right? If you're an online learner, then it works for you. And if you're not, then it really does not.
Really doesn't. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, that's
So
it.
video school during the pandemic wasn't horrible for everybody, is what I'm taking away from this. There were
Absolutely. Yeah.
people
Correct.
who were just fine with that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because, like
That's
Jenny
good to
was just
know.
saying, for some kids, it is great. Like, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to do what I need to do, crank it out, and then I can move on.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other kids who don't learn that way
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
need
Yep.
different, tactile learning, social learning, etc.,
Yep.
immersive learning. And then there's also, I think the pandemic more than anything, I mean, it affected the kids for sure, but I think it also affected households where both parents worked outside the home.
Oh,
And
God.
or
Yeah.
if a parent worked from home, but then they all of a sudden had their kid home all day instead of going to school,
Yeah.
like there was a mass wave of women who left the workforce during the pandemic because they had to
Yeah.
someone had to stay home with the
Yep.
kids while the kids were in school online.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. We're
So there's
still
also
feeling the
that public school,
repercussions.
and school can also be like it's childcare, right? If you're
Oh, yeah.
both parents are working full time or
Yeah.
part time or whatever, like school is also, so then it becomes like, okay, well, this school isn't working,
Mm-hmm.
do
Mm-hmm.
the parents have to shift their life setup in order to accommodate a child's needs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I don't know that thought would have ever occurred to me. I was very in the box. It's like we were out in the
Mm-hmm.
country, and where else would we have? How else would we have done school if we really didn't like the school district we were in?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's nice now that it's possible to be more innovative now, maybe
Mm-hmm.
than we were then. That's cool.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, so Caroline, I want to make sure that we talk a little bit. So you help families navigate the educational system, but you do more than that. And so tell us a little bit more about
Yeah.
what you do and the populations that you serve now with your business.
Mm-hmm. For sure. Yeah. So definitely assessments still make up a big part of what I do, but parent coaching, and specifically like women coaching, ADHD coaching. Sometimes they have their own diagnosis. Sometimes they're coming in to support a child with a diagnosis or suspected diagnosis. And so, kind of coaching around that. Because people with ADHD are often functioning in this like elevated state a lot. I do a lot of
Mm-hmm.
clinical hypnotherapy with clients to work
Hmm.
on calming the nervous system, right? Working with the vagus nerve, and all of those things naturally, helping ADHD, right? Not everybody wants medication, though if you do, that's perfectly great too. So that is a big part of what I do. And then also I'm a part of the trans affirming
Mm.
community. And so I do work with several members of the LGBTQ community as well.
Awesome. So with hypnotherapy and vagus nerve, are you doing hypnotherapy sessions with people as a form of healing or walking them through things? Like, what does that look like for ADHD
Mhm.
treatment?
Yeah, so we can be either of those, right? Some of it is just like positive affirmations of kind of reprogramming kind of that unconscious mind. Because a lot of people, like women especially, come in, you're right, I'm not smart, I'm not good at that,
Mm-hmm.
I can't do that.
Hmm.
None of that is true. So reshaping that.
Yeah.
And then some of it just is uh, processing that anxiety, maybe a little bit of depression, and those types of things.
Yeah, I want to find out more about that. I've heard of people fainting. I've run into instances of the vagus nerve giving you trouble before. I hadn't thought about it in a psychological sense too,
Mm.
as doing a meditation or a calm,
Hmm.
deliberately calming, intentionally calming
Mm-hmm.
a
Yeah.
vagus nerve issue. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of the reason I think the clinical hypnotherapy is so effective is kind of like we said at the beginning, is having that accountability person, right? We all know that we need to kind of take that time to unwind and all of that, but most of us don't. Like even
Yeah.
myself, right? And I know better. So when you
It's
have
easy
like
to do.
and so if I like that person's accountability person and they know they have to show up with me for this session, then we kind of do that together. And really, how I like to think of it is you're not actually doing anything. You just really need to show up for yourself, and then I do the work
Yeah.
as the clinical
There you go.
hypnotherapist. So
There
it
you go.
can't
Good
possibly get any
frame.
easier than that.
That's true.
Very cool.
Yeah. Awesome. So
I
I have
saw a note
one.
here before. Go ahead, sweetie. It was the same thing. I've seen this. I have this bullet
It's
point:
fine.
attachment parenting. That's just bugging the heck out of me.
Oh.
Oh.
So I put that bullet point on there because we had touched on just shared values. So you are a
Mm.
parent, and so
Yeah.
we talked about the importance of, and there's a negative connotation to a traditional definition of attachment parenting, meaning that your child has to be literally attached to you at all times or something. But
Yeah.
attachment parenting and relational parenting have a lot in common in the responsive meeting the emotional and mental needs of children, and that heavily
Hmm.
overlaps with educational needs, right? How we learn, because if we don't have a powerful parental or primary caregiver healthy attachment or relationship with our parents, then stepping out into the social and academic world can be even more taxing, even more difficult for children
Yeah.
who don't have healthy relational skills, or who have a secure attachment figure, because then they're not only are they feel like they're on their own to handle life in the home, but they then step out into the world and have no sense of stability under them to approach, difficult things.
Mhm.
So that's why I threw that bullet point on there. But I would love to hear, Caroline, your perspective in your personal life, being a parent with these concepts.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that really has impacted me the most as a parent. And like we talked about before the podcast, attachment parenting has gotten kind of this weird reputation. Like celebrities have said and done different things that have made it seem like kind of weird, right? Like attachment parenting doesn't mean you're breastfeeding till your kid is 7 or whatever.
Right. Right.
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Not that there's anything wrong with that if that is how you choose to parent. But so where did we land? Are we allowed to say like names and authors and stuff?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So shaping my view of attachment parenting is a Canadian psychologist out of British Columbia. His name is Dr. Gordon Neufeld, who wrote Holding On to Your Kids, which is one of the most, I think, well-known books on attachment parenting. And he talks about how, as a parent, you really need to be your kid's rock. Because like Jenny, you know, how you said, when the kid goes out into the world, we don't know what's going to come at them. Peers sometimes are, your best friend, and then the next day they're like spreading nasty rumors about you. So if kids are left to attach to their friends, then their rock one day is what's like trying to take them out the next. So as a parent, to be, your kid's rock really is all that means to me. And why I think that's so important. Now, you would hear people say, well, 50 years ago, we just called that good parenting, which maybe is the case. But now
I disagree. I think 50 years ago, there were a lot of parents who the model was make your kids tough. Don't let your kids be weenies, like toughen your kids up.
Yeah.
And so so they can face a cruel world. And
That's
I say, and the research says that was the language back then, as far as I know. Yeah. I don't know. I wasn't alive. But the research has shown time and time again that what actually helps kids face difficulty in the world is being shown how to navigate difficulty in a healthy, emotionally respectful way in the house, and being responded to with love and kindness. And being taught then healthy skills to work through hard emotions, not just shut up, you're fine, move on with your life. Because then it all still lives inside of you. It doesn't move. It doesn't move and process and get out of your body. It just continues to be pushed and shoved and packed in. And then you turn 25 and have a mental breakdown one day, and you wonder why.
Yeah, it gets to be a habit.
Yeah, that's right.
Not speaking about personal experience. That was a joke.
That's right. We need to feel the feels, right? Yeah. So that we can address them and then move on.
Yeah. Yeah. And being a rock for someone means they can lean on you. Right?
Yeah. Which takes time and energy, and, as a parent, you're there already anyway. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have like 7 different tangents happening in my head right now, but we are at an hour and 20 minutes. So, wow. Are there any last thoughts, Caroline, that you have that you want to share before we wrap things up?
If I had to share one message, it would be nobody knows your kid better than you. Nobody's in a better position than you to be their advocate.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good. I like having a list, like a short list of little pithy sayings to keep in mind as a parent. Things are so busy. It's nice to have nice to have a short list of touchdowns. It's like, it's this urgent and important. No one's better off, especially if you're sitting there across the table from a teacher that doesn't know how to deal with your kid, and you're advocating for, you're getting the head pat on, she'll be fine.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm the expert here. Thank you very much.
That's right.
Right.
Exactly.
I like that.
I love it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Terrific to meet you.
You too.
All right, everybody, we will see you next week. This episode truly solidified for me the absolute necessity to do your research, know your child, and seek support or guidance when making decisions about your child's education. Standard public school is great for some, and depending on the resources available, could be the best and most diverse service option for your kid. But it may not be, and paying close attention to your child's silent cues that maybe school isn't working for them could save them a childhood full of confusion, misunderstanding, and even misguided punishment for behaviors outside their control. To know, advocate for, and respect your child's needs is the highest form of love, and you don't have to do it alone. Like Carolyn said, find the right people who will be by your side and make life a little easier along the way. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this episode, or you are wishing you had a friend to digest it with, I would be so honored if you shared this link from this episode with them. I myself have always benefited from community and sharing, and I truly believe that it takes a village to raise a child. Our society has become so independent from one another, and parenting these days is often a lonely journey. But it doesn't have to be that way. That's why I'm here. If you have been seeking a more intentional approach to parenting, but you aren't sure where to start, I would love to hear from you. You can find me and all of my offerings at www.jennyb.co. And come follow me on all major social media platforms. It fills my heart to hear your stories, where you come from, and your big goals for raising the next generation. And don't forget, comment your parenting question on our YouTube channel, The Relational Parenting Podcast, to get it answered on one of our future episodes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit the subscribe button so you never miss out. I am so grateful that you are here, and always remember, you are never alone. I'll see you next week. This show is intended for education and entertainment purposes only. We will discuss things like mental health, abuse, PTSD, and other potentially triggering subjects. Please listen at your own discretion, and this podcast is not intended for anyone under the age of 18.